Did I get you guys? Hello everybody, welcome back to Access Blockbusters and welcome to a look back on Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Today we'll be taking a look at the 2022 MCU film that featured Benedict Cumberbatch as Doctor Strange, as well as many other multiversal figures that pop up along the way. But before we get into any of that, if you haven't subscribed to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, make sure to do so. Give this video a like. If you're enjoying the Phase 4 MCU look-backs and rewatches, let me know in the comments down below. Comment with your thoughts on Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. As always, this video will be broken up into 3 parts. The first part will be explaining the context behind the film, what was going on around the time, what my thoughts were before going into the film for the first time, what my thoughts were when I saw the film for the first time, and then what my thoughts were going into the rewatch. Part 2 is a sort of rundown of the film, new details that I spotted, what I thought about the film this time around upon the rewatch, and then the third part is going to be whether or not my opinion changed upon rewatching the film. So with all that being said, let's get into Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. So it's fair to say, this film had probably the highest expectations out of almost any of the MCU projects coming out after Endgame, maybe save for Spider-Man No Way Home. This was supposed to be the film, it's called the Multiverse Saga, so you kind of expect this to be the film leading up to Avengers Kang Dynasty. This was going to be the big crossover event, again, Spider-Man No Way Home notwithstanding, but even so, this film was supposed to have all the cameos, was supposed to explain the multiverse, was supposed to tie everything that we had been seeing together, WandaVision, Loki, Spider-Man No Way Home. It was supposed to tie up all the loose ends and make sure that we understood the multiverse going forward. And if you remember the speculation before Spider-Man No Way Home, if you remember how crazy that was, thinking that Matt Murdock was going to show up, thinking that Andrew Garfield and Tobey Maguire were going to show up, even Venom was going to show up, all those being true in the end. Well, the speculation behind this film might have been even crazier. It's the multiverse. Pretty much anything is possible in the multiverse. And perhaps that is one of the pitfalls of just doing anything multiverse related, is that literally anything is possible. But it allowed the speculation to kind of run rampant, and it was fun for a while. We thought Tom Cruise was coming back as Iron Man, even Robert Downey Jr. might come back as Iron Man, Chris Evans might come back as Steve Rogers. The possibilities were endless. I've always said though, and I think I've been on record of saying this, that the cameos, while fun, should not define the movie. The cameos should be fun, they should be little Easter eggs, or they should be fun guest appearances, but they should not make the movie what it is, because if that's the case, then turns out that the movie is probably not as good as we think it is. So I was just hoping, going into Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, again, knowing that Elizabeth Olsen was in the movie as the Scarlet Witch, although we suspected she was the villain, we didn't know for sure, but I love Elizabeth Olsen, I loved WandaVision, and so I just hoped we were going to get a really fun, good, solid multiversal film. And for the most part, after I saw the film, I thought that was pretty much what we got. It was a very solid, if not maybe a little bit underwhelming, but very fun multiversal kind of film. Didn't really explore the multiverse that much, but it was still enjoyable. Now the film, while it did get a decent critical rating and it did make a lot of money at the box office, in fact, I think something like $900 million, has not been hailed as the greatest MCU film ever made by the MCU fans in the years that have followed. And that's maybe not a knock on the film itself, especially given the vehement distaste that the MCU fans have for other properties in the MCU that have come out post Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. So the fact that even people seem to like this film a little bit but were disappointed maybe is a big win in hindsight, but still, it seems like people have been disappointed by the film just in the fact that it wasn't living up to the potential of its concept. And there are other things here and there that we'll get to that maybe explain why people just are not satisfied with this movie. For my part, again, I enjoyed the film the first time, and I was looking forward to the rewatch because I'd seen it again, I think maybe once in its entirety, and seen clips and pieces here and there, but just remembering that I enjoyed the film for what it was. I kind of remind me of Age of Ultron in the sense that they're two enjoyable films that help set up the future of their sagas, the Infinity Saga and the Multiverse Saga, while just being entertaining films, and that's what I was expecting on the rewatch, and that's pretty much what I got, although I will say that I was perhaps a little bit more underwhelmed this time around than I was the first time. So let's kind of dig into the plot and the themes and the characters and the goodies that Doctor Strange 2 has in store for us. So I will say right off the bat that Sam Raimi is the one who directed this film, and Sam Raimi, for those of you who don't know, is the one who directed Spider-Man 1, 2, and 3 with Tobey Maguire, but he also directed other horror films such as Evil Dead. He's known for having a very distinctive style. If you watch clips from Evil Dead, if you even watch clips from Spider-Man 2 when Doc Ock is born, you kind of get the horror aspects of Sam Raimi's filmmaking. He likes close-ups, he likes these kind of fun pans and zoom-ins and fade-ins, and he's just a very stylistic director. And so I think it's fair to worry if his style overpowers the film, and while I do think it does in certain places, I am also pleasantly surprised to say that the beginning of the film, at least, and for the vast majority of it, really, it feels like a very solid, just superhero kind of film, which might seem like a knock, might seem like I'm making it sound like Doctor Strange 2 is just very generic, but I think that for a guy like Sam Raimi, it's kind of hard because he has just such a unique style that I think you just kind of get on board or you don't, and I think that for me, it just doesn't quite work in certain scenes. So I'm kind of glad that the beginning of the film, where Doctor Strange and America Chavez are running away from Wanda's monster, it seemed very, very MCU, and I think that's a good thing, actually. The visuals are pretty cool. The monster seems a little CGI. Some of the visuals are kind of CGI, but the Doctor Strange visuals in general, I'm glad that they're able to capture that visual language of the spells and move them from film to film, because I think that's one of the best parts of the character, honestly. I will say, though, one of the complaints that I had the first time, one of the complaints that almost everyone had the first time, and certainly it carries over into the rewatch, is that the dialogue is not the greatest. And look, I get it. There are some themes you want to explore here about Strange being unhappy, but to just kind of have the characters say over and over again, "Are you happy, Steven?" Maybe not the best or most subtle writing. Even some of America Chavez's lines at the beginning of the film, just, they didn't feel subtle. They just kind of felt like, okay, we got to write something down. Michael Waldron said, who's the writer, by the way, Michael Waldron said, we just have to tell the audience what's going on. And that's what it felt like. It's not cringeworthy necessarily. It just kind of feels like you're kind of being beat over the head with these themes. Like, hey, look, audience, this is what you're supposed to be knowing about these characters. This is what you're supposed to be thinking. And it, it doesn't make for the most dynamic of filmmaking. The one-eyed monster fight is Sam Raimi being very Sam Raimi, but I will say that I think the fight itself is pretty cool. I know that the eyeball thing, when the eyeball pops out, that's kind of grotesque. It is very grotesque, actually, but I didn't mind it as much as I thought I would, which is kind of weird because normally I would just hate that kind of thing, but I think it was sort of interesting, at least. In that instance, maybe I appreciate Sam Raimi's stylistic flair. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say. Then after that, Xochitl Gomez's America Chavez meets Wong, meets Strange, they meet the corpse, which will come back into play later, and then we get into the Wanda part of the movie. So let's talk about Wanda Maximoff, because Wanda Maximoff is probably the most polarizing part of this film. Was it a good idea to make her the villain? Was it a good idea to rehash her arc from WandaVision? I have a couple thoughts on this that maybe have changed a little bit from my first time watching the film. Do I think that Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness undermines her arc in WandaVision? Do I think, for example, that this villainous turn for Wanda Maximoff is undoing everything in WandaVision? No. And I say that as somebody who loves WandaVision. You can go check out my rewatch of WandaVision I did a few weeks ago. You can check out my original videos on WandaVision. I love the show. So if anybody were to say, and I'm not saying that, if you think that this villainous turn is wrong and you just don't like it, I'm not saying that that's wrong of you to think that. I'm just saying as somebody who does really love WandaVision, I think that the villain turn is actually quite neat and quite interesting, and I don't think it undermines anything in WandaVision at all. Do I think it is a little bit of a rehash of the story arc, though? In that regard, I think I'm a little bit more on that camp than I was before, and I don't think that's necessarily a terrible thing. I just think it is what it is. It's sort of a similar story arc, except this time she's more of a villain. I don't think it's the exact same, to be fair. I know there are some people out there who are saying WandaVision and Doctor Strange 2 are basically the same arcs for Wanda. I don't think that's true at all. I think that there is perhaps a little bit of a take on the idea of grief and sort of the more villainous, rageful aspects of what it could have been in WandaVision. I think in WandaVision was a more nuanced discussion of dealing with grief and sort of how your pain manifests into something that it shouldn't. This film is more just dealing with the rage and the anger of, not having what you want and trying to bring back what you love. I think that it makes some sense to me. And so in the end, it just doesn't bother me. I'm willing to accept it. And also because Elizabeth Olsen's acting is just incredible. I mean, she's one of the best actresses they were able to get in the MCU. And so the more Elizabeth Olsen, the better, I think. She also has some of the best lines in the film, by the way.
The hex was the easy part. The lying, not so much. You break the rules and become a hero. I do it and I become the enemy. That doesn't seem fair.
These are great lines. I think they wrote all the best lines for her, honestly. But then we kind of get into the multiverse hopping of the film and Wanda's attack on Kamar-Taj, and I think this is where Sam Raimi kind of lets go and just he had free reign to do whatever he wanted, because there are parts of this film, like here at the attack on Kamar-Taj and also later on in Earth 838, where Wanda just turns into basically a zombie or a movie monster ghoul kind of thing. Like, she just kind of turns into this random mindless horror creature that's chasing them around. And I don't love that as much. I don't love that she's doing that here at Kamar-Taj, because it just takes away the three-dimensionality that we love from Wanda Maximoff. But once we get into the second act, once we get into the multiverse hopping, I think this is the part of the film where things just kind of happen. I think that this film is interesting because unlike other MCU films, which I think have fairly strong second acts, I think the journey part of a lot of MCU films are some of the best parts of those films, especially films like Civil War, for example. The second act is probably the best part of that entire film. I think Doctor Strange 2's second act is fairly weak, actually, because things just kind of happen. Doctor Strange just kind of runs into the Illuminati, and then he kind of just ends up with the Book of Vishanti, which just disintegrates when Wanda shows up. And he just kind of ends up in a world with incursions. It just kind of happens. It's entertaining enough because, I mean, cameos, right? Who doesn't love John Krasinski as Mr. Fantastic? But it just, things aren't really sequential. They're just happening. Or I guess they are sequential, like they're happening one after the other, but maybe they're not necessarily causal. It doesn't feel like the film is driving itself forward. Things, again, just happen. As far as the multiverse cameos, they're just cameos and they're fun. They're always fun. I mean, it's great to go on YouTube and look up, the multiverse scene, the Illuminati scene in Doctor Strange 2. I mean, yeah, John Krasinski, Jim Halpert as Mr. Fantastic, great. Everyone loved him as the fan casting, and I think that that's awesome. He was great. Amazing to see Charles Xavier again. That's awesome. But again, it just kind of feels like it was there for the sake of being there, and then the film just kind of moves on, It wasn't like Toby and Andrew, which felt so integral to that film. I will say, though, even though the second act meanders a lot, when Strange goes to the incursion world, the design of that world, that reality that had been broken by an incursion, that's fantastic. And if they're going to explore that more as they head to Kang Dynasty, that's fantastic. I just think the design of the broken world, the reality that's shattering, and that evil Strange, that's just so cool. I love that. Also, I'm a huge fan of the music fight still. I know that some people think it's corny, some people think it's just bad and looks weird, and I don't care. But I'm personally one of those people who just love the fight. I think it's just, if you're using Doctor Strange's visual language, you should utilize it to the fullest capacity. Do crazy things with Doctor Strange. That's the character that you do that for. Don't do it with characters like, I don't know, Ironheart or Black Panther or whatever, but do it with Doctor Strange. Like, it would feel a little weird if you just did crazy, weird things with magic with Black Panther, but with Doctor Strange, I mean, that's what he's there for, right? And then from there, I will say that the third act actually pulls itself together fairly nicely. I think that I'm a big fan, personally, of the Doctor Strange corpse thing, with all the soul-sucking demons or whatever kind of flying around and making himself a cape. I think that all of that is Raimi sensibilities fitting well into the MCU. Not a big fan of all the random zoom-ins and the close-ups that he does and making Wanda turn into a horror monster. Not a big fan of that, but the ending with Doctor Strange possessing the corpse, I think for whatever reason that just it makes a lot more sense to me in the Raimi sensibilities of the MCU. Final fight is fairly compelling. It's a little bit short, but I think that that's fine. It didn't need to go on for 30 minutes, honestly. And then the film ends with America kind of figuring out her powers. America is, not having seen a lot of Phase 5 when I'm recording this video, America Chavez is kind of an interesting character just based on the one appearance, because she can open up any portal to the multiverse. That kind of seems crazy overpowered. And also, where has she been exactly? But then Wanda sees her kids think she's a monster. That whole scene was a bit cheesy. I get what they were going for, and the film ends with Strange with a third eye, which looks terrible. Honestly, it looks terrible. But that's the film. And so, I mean, what I will say about Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, transitioning into my updated thoughts, is that I think this film, kind of like Age of Ultron, is entertaining enough. If you pop it on, I don't think you're going to be bored at all. Maybe in a bad way because you're going to dislike a lot of what you see, but also in a good way. I think there are some fun parts of it. The Illuminati scene is always fun. But unlike Age of Ultron, which kind of felt like it had a good solid plot underneath it, and maybe the plot just wasn't as interesting, maybe it was a little generic, I think Doctor Strange 2 suffers a little bit just because it doesn't feel like it knows what it wants to be. And this was a film that in production had a lot of things going on with it. I think there were multiple rewrites. I think that there were multiple reshoots. I think that a lot of things were going on with the writers, the directors, Scott Derrickson, Sam Raimi. So it's understandable that this film kind of ended up the way that it was, but it's still a little disappointing that at this point in the MCU Phase 4, as we chug along towards the end of Phase 4, towards Black Panther Wakanda Forever and the holiday special, that we don't really know what the multiverse is. And so we were kind of hoping a film called Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness would help explain that. I guess it didn't. It's a fun film. I like Doctor Strange as always. And so in terms of Phase 4 so far, it was enjoyable. It definitely was. So those are my thoughts on Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness after a rewatch. What did you guys think of Doctor Strange 2? Let me know in the comments down below. Have you rewatched it? Have you seen it only once? Do you think that it's better than the original? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe to the Access Blockbusters YouTube channel, and I will see you guys in the next one.